panel tonight we have Kate Forrest, a Newcastle-based poet and comedian, Alan Campbell, the Labour MP for Tynemouth and a former teacher at Whitleybeth High School, David Lilly, the Conservative Chancellor for Young Children, People and Learning, Peter Mortimer, a local poet, playwright and journalist, and Laura Pidcock, currently studying for a Master's in Disaster Management, who also works for Show Racism The Red Card. And we'll start off straight away. We have our first question from the form class 9JLE. Who's reading that? So can you read us the first question, please?
Should UN forces officially declare war on Libya and deploy ground troops to remove Colonel Gaddafi's regime?
Alan Campbell, please.
No, they shouldn't. I supported a vote in the House of Commons on Monday the UN resolution, partly because I think the UN action is justified and is right, and also by that time we committed our air and sea forces. I thought that was the right thing to do, but Resolution 1973 is very clear that it doesn't commit what it calls forces of occupation, which means ground troops. What we need to do is to make sure that the skies above Libya are controlled so that Colonel Gaddafi cannot do what he threatened to do, which is to attack particularly areas around Benghazi and search for civilians from house to house and carry out the kind of massacre which he's promised. So I don't support a land invasion, but I do support the no-fly zone.
Laura Pidcock.
Yeah, I think I would have to absolutely agree with Alan there. I think it's such a difficult issue. Even this kind of UN resolution that's being passed right now, and I still have kind of real moral difficulty with, because it's kind of a balance, isn't it, between protecting Libyans, you know, who are definitely under attack from their leader, but also kind of not causing any harm in the stage of intervention. So I think what we have right now is the best we can do, and I hope in doing our best we don't do any harm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Peter Mortimer.
It's hard to know whether we should be in Libya or not. I know one thing, if the United Nations are there, which they are, the two countries that should not be there are the UK and the USA. Given the recent history of our countries involved in the Arab world, with all those countries in the UN, why on earth are we leading it? We have no trust in the Arab world, quite rightly. We've had disastrous wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and now here we are again, gung-ho, off we go into Arabia. Why don't we just stand back and let somebody else? If we need to go in, and I'm not saying we do, then why don't we stand back and let somebody else do it?
Okay, Kate Forrest.
Luckily, I don't think anyone that I'm aware of is seriously suggesting that we declare war and send ground troops in. I don't think there's been at least enough of a sense of, yeah, we kind of, even David Cameron gets that would be a bad thing, and just going into the air is sufficiently indulging his action tendencies. Doing that feels good, but there's no actual messy hand-to-hand, flesh-on-flesh stuff. So it's sort of okay. So I feel we will be all right on that front.
But I mean, you feel that the idea of just enforcing a no-fly zone is enough to protect people of Libya who are being killed?
It doesn't currently seem that it is, no, because people in Libya are still being killed. Possibly fewer people than there would have been, actually, so maybe Alan's nodding, so that, maybe that's kind of justifiable. But actually, the very thought, it now makes it seem even madder to me than it ever did that we ever went into Iraq, though. Just the very thought. And then Alan is more shaking his head because I don't know that we went into Iraq. Iraq, in person, was good. It was flying in Libya.
David.
I actually totally agree with Alan on this. I think there is a spectrum of interventions, and I think in the Balkans and in Rwanda, we have one end of the spectrum which we took no action immediately, and as a result, genocide occurred, and we went in rather late, especially in the Balkans. Perhaps Iraq and Afghanistan's the other end of the spectrum, and on reflection, there may have been too much intervention there. I feel that Libya falls between two, and I think the action taken by the UN is the correct action to enforce this no-fly zone, to stop Gaddafi just indiscriminately killing his own people, because he is a monster, and if we don't try to contain him, he will take his revenge on these people, and I think we have a a moral duty to protect these people. I do worry about us being involved on the ground, and I hope we're strong enough not to get kind of sucked in to going in on the ground and what might be a short-term intervention, which becomes a medium-term intervention, which becomes a long-term intervention, because as Peter said, I don't think we have much trust in the Arab world. And I would worry about us getting involved in it.
I never said I didn't have trust in the Arab world.
No.
I don't have trust in the UK and the USA.
I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon, because I meant to agree with you saying that the Arab world don't trust them.
Yeah.
Trust them.
But I don't think they do trust us now. Quite right.
Right, well, Alan, you were shaking to the last.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, without wanting to sound flippant, we've done the easy bit, which is to get sufficient people in the UN to agree to the resolution and not to get anybody to oppose it at this part of the process. Part of that, of course, was getting the Arab League signed up to supporting it, so they either give us cover or at best are going to help us to do what we need to do. But the hard bit comes next. If Gaddafi goes, then it's relatively straightforward. I suppose we claim that we've won. If Gaddafi stays and survives, that's very, very difficult, I think, for the future. But the worst outcome of all is that we have a kind of stalemate, where he survives, but we don't actually have the power to change the situation. Because, as Kate said, she was talking about Iraq and saying, well, we were wrong in doing what we did in Iraq. We had a 12-year no-fly zone over Iraq. It wasn't sufficient, and it slipped into, if you like, a situation where it looked as if the next step was going to be a land invasion, which I supported and I still support today. But all I'm saying is, it's not always in your grasp to be able to make very clear decisions on these matters. Sometimes they take on a life of their own, and I think that's where the government's got problems, because I'm not sure it knows where it wants to be.
And actually, do you know what absolutely boggles my mind, and it's even more relevant when we're in a school? You know, if you wanted to take a busload of Whitley Bay High pupils to the sea, a teacher would have to do pages of risk assessments of all the things that might possibly go wrong on the coach to the sea. And we'd have a pretty good idea of all the possible outcomes. Drown, someone could get run over, etc. But going into a country with aeroplane and bombing it, it appears that that risk assessment, that quite basic risk assessment, really hasn't been done, so that you can have a defence minister say, well, oh, how long's a piece of string? We might be there quite a long while. Oh, do you know what? Really, if Gaddafi's, oh, if he's gone or if he's not gone. How bizarre. That's why can that
more of a kind of a moral question, and I suppose like a deeper issue set aside from kind of national politics is that there are crises in other countries of as much seriousness, on the Ivory Coast, and that there is definitely genocide going on in Darfur and Sudan at the minute. Yet there seems to be no real urgency for intervention there, and I think there's lots of issues going on here, who's kind of got the most oil, and I hate to be, kind of predictable in bringing that up, because it's always the thing that people bring up with Iraq, but it has to be said that it's not altruistic, and I can't think we should fool ourselves that it is altruistic and it's for freeing the Libyan people. I think it's for keeping domestic situations in Britain, in France, in America pretty sweet, so that there isn't similar kind of revolutions over petrol and things like that.
I think Gaddafi's a bit of a loony. In 1986, when we helped the Americans bomb Libya, I was actually in the United States, in Austin, Texas, and they had a protest march against the American bombing of Libya, and I went on it, and Joe Byers led it, and I got up and spoke to him. I was ashamed that the bombers were taking off Britain. He's a loony, but lots of the world leaders are loonies, and it's who do we select? Who do we select to go in against next? And we do seem to have this obsession at the moment with the Arab world. I wish we could get over it, I just wish we could get over it, leave it alone, because our reputation there is in tatters.
Right, well, I think we're going to move on to our next topic of debate, but first of all the audience, you have a green and a red piece of card. We're going to do a bit of a poll. If you think the UN should declare official war on Libya, hold the green card. If you feel we should not, hold the red card. Right, so it's quite a strong majority for not going in then.
Tell me your answer straight away.
Right, so we'll move on to our next question, which written by 12JDS. Let's just go over there.
Should England follow Scotland and Wales on the tuition fees issue?
David Lilly.
I think it's a difficult question to answer. I think we're in a situation where we possibly can't afford to follow Scotland and Wales on this issue. I think the genie, in a sense, is out of the bottle. Once you let the genie out of the bottle, it's very difficult to put the genie back in. And it was let out in 1997, so tuition fees have been with us since then. Top fees have been with us since 2003. The recently commissioned Brown report was due to report to the then Labour government about tuition fees. And I don't think the Labour government had any intention of doing anything other than, as I think as Lord Manderson said, was to implement the report from the Brown report. I think tuition fees are here, and we have to realise that university education has to be paid for somehow, and there isn't the money in the economy at the moment for large amounts of it to be placed in universities. We can go on all night about the deficit, whose fault it is, how big it is, and what you should do with it. But we are where we are, and the decision has been made to take this stand on tuition fees.
But I mean, the question is more about the relationship between the English view and the Scottish view on tuition fees.
Well, the Scots obviously pay for them and don't spend the money elsewhere. We have a much bigger budget to play with, and we have to split it the way we think it has to be split. And I don't think philosophically you can agree with Scotland and Wales, but practically there isn't the money there to do it.
Okay, we'll go through.
When I was 16, I left home and I did my A-levels, went to school. Being at school, that was my stability really, and lived in a bedsit. And I went to university in '93, and I was one of the last people therefore to get any sort of a grant. Had I had to contemplate the fact that not only would I not get a grant, but I would have had to store up all that level of debt for my future, I wouldn't have gone to university. And I know there are many thousands like me. I think that the country, the lack of social mobility in this country, it astounds me. I do work on Radio 4, where I am, I think, basically their token normal. The proportion of people on Radio 4, for example, to take one example, who went to public schools is many times the national average. The proportion of MPs who went to public schools, who went to, is many times the national average. The proportion of judges, the proportion of most of the top professions you could name, and that seems to be going away from tuition fees. But I think it would have so much benefit to our economy, our society, and our culture if we made education far more accessible than it now is. And over the last 20 years, it seems to have become less accessible. And I've scrapped Trident, for example, and this is where I wish I was one of those proper panellists who would have the statistics and go, scrapping Trident and lots of other things would raise this much, and it would be enough to scrap tuition fees. I think it's such a priority that my mind is still boggling. It's very sad. Labour were in favour of having tuition fees too. We wouldn't be in a much better position, I don't suppose, had Labour got in a bit better. We'd be slightly less. I could say much more.
Yeah, I think we're basically our civilised societies by which invests in its these people. I mean, I went to university so long ago, if you remember it existed in the 1960s. I got a free education. My 3 years at university totally changed my life, made me a much more, well, I hope it did anyway, more developed person. And the money it invested in me, I think the money pretty well spent on school. Absolutely. But seriously, also, if you purely take it on the economic level, every pound invested in education pays for itself. And I don't buy this thing that there's not enough money. It's doctrinaire. If Scotland can do it and Wales can do it, we can do it. We don't want to do it. You know, we're producing a much more elitist society now, run by billionaires who have no idea how the normal man or woman reacts or thinks or has to survive. And the education system, like Kate says, you know, most of the things in the media, in Parliament and whatever, are smaller and smaller, narrower, kind of clean. In the 1960s, it started to, you know, we had Harold Wilson, Edward Heath, whatever side, grammar schools began to rule the country and things like that. It was quite, I mean, grammar school boys and girls, even Thatcher was no fan of. But now it's gone much back to more elitist, and it's going to become much more elitist. Who will go to university now? Who will go, even if they go, they'll live at home because they can't afford to go. I only moved 40 miles, but it was like going to Mars. I moved from Nottingham to Sheffield. I thought, there's a whole universe 40 miles away, and I lived away from home. And that was one of the best things I learned. To have gone and stayed at home would have been not the experience at all. So I think it's absolutely, you know, it's scandalous that we're not investing in the future. I would not like to be, you know, a young person today because you just do not get the opportunities. Why? Why don't we get the opportunities? You know, why is there not the money that there was in the 1960s? I know in this particular moment we're a bit short, but it's not just this particular moment. It's the mindset of recent years that has squeezed and squeezed and squeezed the education system, and it's a disgrace.
The simple answer to your question is that Scotland has an SNP government, and after May we'll have a Labour government. Wales has a Labour government, and after May we'll still have a Labour government. It's one of the benefits of devolution that they're able to make up their own mind and allocate their resources accordingly. The reason why we're soon to have £9,000 tuition fees is because we have a Tory-led coalition. The Tories didn't promise, in fact didn't say that they would raise tuition fees. And the Lib Dems campaigned against it, and it's one of the outcomes of the coalition agreement that this is a route that we have gone down. I'll agree with David on one thing, which is that university costs money, and we had to grapple with this when we were in power. And to me, there are two beneficiaries from a university degree. The first is the individual themselves, and it does enhance their career normally, though I don't think university is just about careers and salaries by any means. I agree with Peter. I think it's about the whole person. But most of the jobs that we create in the modern economy in the future are going to require very high skills, and therefore there was an agreement struck that we would ask for a contribution from the individual, but the state would put in most money. That has gone. I'll tell you that that consensus has completely broken down, and what we're looking at now is the marketisation of higher education. One of the outcomes of marketisation normally is that if you have the resources, you're able to do things, and if you don't, then you can't. And let me just say one thing, Robbie. This has absolutely nothing to do with reducing the deficit. Nothing at all to do with that. Of course we've got a deficit, of course we agree that it has to be paid off, and we disagree about how it's done and the length of time. This has absolutely nothing at all to do with it, for the simple reason, none of the money that comes from the increase in tuition fees will be at a time when we're paying off under the government's deficit reduction plan. Under the government's deficit reduction plan, the money will have been paid off before tuition fees kick in. So why are they going down this route? Why are they particularly penalising arts graduates, students, and why are they particularly penalising people from areas such as this? Not the access necessarily to the poorer sections of the community, but actually the middle-class communities and the schools in middle-class areas, for which £9,000, I fear, is going to put people off from considering going.
Yeah, I kind of have to really concentrate on breathing when I'm talking about this issue, because I was kind of the last people, or one of the last people to get through on the lowest kind of tuition fees that Labour introduced, and I really do feel like I have benefited from it. But David, you said that university has to be paid by people, you know, those who can afford it. And that's fine. That's a decision taken by those who can afford it, who have children, who come from families who can afford it, and being prescribed to those who definitely cannot afford it. And I think that it's an absolute bubble to think that even the prospect of £45,000, it is a noose around your neck. I mean, the noose that I've got around my neck is £16,000, and that's bad enough. But to triple that, there is absolutely no way that somebody from a community like mine, an ex-mining village, would think, oh, you know what, I'm going to really strive to be a medic so that I can come out at the end of it and have £50,000 worth of debt. And also, the reason there's a difference between Scotland and Wales, as Alan said, is quite right, is because they're ideologically different. You know, this is an ideological decision taken on behalf of the Tory-led coalition. And I think Alan's right in saying that actually a lot of the things that they're cutting the funding to harshest are things that middle class and upper class people have got the time to do anyway. You know, I can enjoy philosophy because I don't have to work. I can enjoy being an artist because I don't have to work. Whereas working class people, they have 12-hour shifts, you know. And then we talk about kind of running out of cash and being a real, you know, in a recession, which is obviously a global recession. We created the NHS when we'd just come out of the Second World War. I mean, what other time were we at a ground zero as a country than post-World War II? I can't believe that this is any kind of justification for cutting the chances of millions of working class people to go to university. Do you know what? We're just getting there. We're just getting there where working class people were starting to think, maybe this is for me. And now we've gone right back. And my friend, she's got a child who's 12, and it was really, really upsetting. Like, really upsetting to think, we were sitting having a conversation, and I said, oh, you know, Carl, like, what are you going to do at university? Because I'd kind of got it into my mindset that that's the natural progression for this young man, because he's so intelligent. And he said, do you know what, Laura? Like, isn't it loads of money to go to uni now? And I said, oh yeah, it is. And I thought, well, should I dissuade them? And you can shake your head and say it's not doing it, but the fact of the matter is, there is going to be that debt. When, even if you are at a wage, when you have to start paying it back, the interest on it is absolutely massive. And why, even the concept, it's like, oh, well, you know, it will be in debt. Even the ideological concept, and I know it was very similar under Labour, even the ideological concept of having to be in debt for an education is disgusting.
What we have here is people deliberately misleading students. It doesn't cost you any more to go to university. It doesn't cost you any more to actually go to university. These fees are not upfront fees. You don't have to go to the bank and take the money out now. You will pay them back.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention that I'm not getting to university.
You don't have to go and say, I can't go to university because I can't afford to give you £9,000 or £6,000 or £3,000 as it was under Labour. Those fees are paid. It is a loan. You will pay that loan back. For less well-off families, there will be increased, more generous student maintenance allowances, but they are going up. Universities who charge over £6,000 will have to widen access and participation to a broader range of students, and if they don't, the Office of Fair Access has the power to apply sanctions to these universities, withdrawing their right to raise their tuition fees. The other aspect of the policy is that graduates won't pay anything back until they're earning over £21,000, which is £6,000 more than stands at the moment. So graduates will earn much, much more in their working lives, They won't start paying back until they earn £21,000. Any graduates who work and don't earn that much will not pay a penny. And any outstanding loans will be written off after 30 years. Now, I went to university. I'm from a working class background. I went to university and I got free education. My sons have gone to university, and as you say, it puts people off. Well, my son is a medic. He's got £20,000 debt. His wife's got a £20,000 debt. But they're going to be earning sufficient money to furnish that debt. In other countries, we talk about free education. We've had free education, free university education for years and years and years, and you know, I benefited from it. The situation is different now, but we look at other countries around the world that have paid for their education for years and years and years, and gone out and done it and got on with it. And it seems to me that the policy, I think, will ensure that university education is actually open to all. Because if we go back to the system we had, where we don't have these loans, it will be the people who can pay will go, and the people who can't pay won't go. So you open up the system by offering these loans, and you offer access to higher education on the basis of ability and not ability to pay up front.
Excuse me, there's a question, I think.
Is there not, sorry, I'm about the threshold that you said that you don't start paying back the loan up to. But the thing is that I only just managed to pay back the interest on my loan every year, so I'm not actually paying any of my loan off. And I'm just wondering if there's a worry that there's a lot of people not going to be able to pay the loan, they're only getting this interest for 30 years until their debt is written off, and is it going to make the money that you're hoping? Is it worth it? Is it actually economically viable?
Well, because there were figures out, some students who are borrowing £39,000 will end up paying back over the course of that 30 years £83,000. So it's not just a case of paying for your education, but actually paying double, well, paying well over what your education actually costs, because you can't afford to pay it back. If you were not lucky enough, I don't know, to be able to afford to do some free work experience, for example, which is what it appears that is absolutely necessary nowadays to be able to access professions like the law, so much medicine. I mean, how would you respond to that, David?
We'll have your point, then we'll move on to the next question.
Just one statistic, to say about statistic. I just read that every missile we fire would cost nearly £1 million. That would set 1,000 people free, 9,000 quid a year. Just take it out. Just one statistic.
Yeah, but you do have to defend your country at the same time as you educate your children, and therefore it's not, I'm afraid, an either or. We're putting out statistics. As far as I'm aware, the government hasn't set the interest rate yet. They daren't set it. And they daren't set it because they don't dare not tell people what the final figure will be. David says it's £21,000. Big deal. £22,000 is average wages. If I'd gone to university, I'd expect to come out, I think, on average wages. I don't know what a teacher comes out now, but I'd expect to do that. And therefore, they will stop paying straight away. And of course, David's right. There is a principle that you actually, what you earn in your lifetime helps you to pay off the loan that you have and your fees that you've got from university. But you're not going to earn 3 times as much in salary as you did last year or the year before, but you are going to be paying 3 times as much in fees. So let's not kid anybody that this is a small amount of money that they're suggesting. And I'll tell you what will happen with access to poorer students. Somebody will shake a stick at universities and say, you've got to stop taking in more poorer students, otherwise we won't let you put your fees up. And I'll tell you what they'll do, they'll go private, and they'll charge whatever they want. That's precisely what they'll do. My final point is this for me, Robbie. The Brown Report, we did commission the Brown Report, but we weren't bound by what Brown came up with. Not even the government has been bound by what Brown has come up with. And I'm getting slightly tired of Conservative politicians telling us that it's all the Labour Party's fault. They're in government now. It's the Conservatives and Liberals that are making these decisions, not the Labour Party.
Right. Questions or points? Questions. Right, well, we're going to have to be quite quick, because we
Well, just isn't it the case that the universities that can least afford this change are the ones that are going to be the hardest hit? Because rich universities like Oxford, Cambridge, where the average income of students is higher, they're the ones that can get away with charging £9,000 a year. Aren't the universities that this is going to hit the worst? The old polytechnics, and aren't we going to have a serious... Is that not going to stop more working class people going to universities if those universities are the hardest hit?
Well, I don't agree with that point, because whatever you call these universities, nobody's being charged up front, so nobody's having to pay any more in September than they paid last September or the September before. So I can't see how it's going to cost more to go to university in September. The loan is more. That's an obvious statement and a true statement, and I accept that. But it isn't going to cost any more for anybody to go to university in September or the following September. And no one was the last September.
Like saying £5 million
We're going to have to move on to the next question. Right, the next question is from 9SPM.
North Tyneside has one of the highest rates of teenage pregnancies in the UK. To combat this, should girls who become pregnant underage be forced to have an abortion?
What I hadn't realised until I started investigating a little bit was that the rate of teenage pregnancies in North Tyneside has fallen by 10% over the last, I think, 12 years. And it seems that one of the key reasons for that is improved education, improved sex education, improved access to contraception, and more working together between agencies and schools, primary care trusts, doctors, etc. And therefore, actually, I would have felt quite optimistic that this downward trend would continue, because all this working together and information would continue to. And I think if cuts were to be made in public services to such a degree that this positive stuff stops happening, then rates would go up again. No, and to answer the question directly, no, I don't for a minute think that teenage girls should be forced to have abortions. I just think that positive trend of information giving and openness continues. The actual proportion of teenage girls who get pregnant is very small.
Well, that's not... the facts I have here say that 52 out of 1,000 girls between 15 and 17 years old become pregnant.
It's less than that in North Tyneside.
Also the North East is the highest by quite a way in the UK.
Proportionally, well, it's not the highest in the UK, it is one of the highest still, and dropping a heck of a lot in North Tyneside, down by 10 points, whereas in South Tyneside, where they've had less working together, it's actually gone up slightly and is at around 52. It was quite funny. Before I came on this panel, I was saying, statistics. I want to be one of them people who has statistics. And I do, I've got loads of statistics. I mean, challenged your statistics. Actually, really, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, and you can kind of do a lot with them. I think actually a key point is obviously around attitudes to teenage pregnancy. I think it's really interesting that I'm detecting a little bit that the perception around the problems of teenage pregnancy is a bit greater than the reality, and I wonder why that might be.
Yeah, I just want to kind of resolve the question first, and then kind of maybe go on to some other things. No woman should ever be forced to do anything, and especially when it comes to their kind of reproductive system. I think that obviously is kind of one of the last bastions, amongst others, of any kind of feminist revolution for women, is that you have complete control over how, when, and why you are given birth. I think pregnancy and aspiration are massively exclusive. I think Also, there's a failure that in schools to sometimes to get to the real crux of the matter, because obviously there's two people involved in any pregnancy, and talking with young women, there's always a sense of kind of a scared sense of asking a man to use a condom, and because they still don't have that sense of empowerment that it is up to them, and therefore they have every right to demand this. And I think that's for all kind of deeper feminist issues like, fear of reprisal or kind of being shunned or whatever. But they are, the root issues, not the fact that a girl's just being careless, not taking responsibility, or that teenagers are having, rampant sex everywhere. I think it is much deeper than that, that once women are treated less like sexual objects and more like equals, where men really feel empowered themselves to take control of their kind of destiny, because I do also know men who have failed to use contraception and are teenagers with children. And so it's not just about the end result of getting rid of a fetus, it's about the very psyche of what it is to be a woman and the responsibilities of that, and what it is to be a man and the responsibilities of that, and everything else in between. I think has to do with your socio-economic situation, in that if you are so distracted and if you aspire to so many things, like university, which is going to become much harder for working class women, then you are utterly petrified of becoming pregnant. You are absolutely petrified, because you think, well, if I've got a baby, I'm not going to achieve what I want to achieve without a great deal more pressure. So that's what I think.
I agree with much of what Laura said. The average for England and Wales actually is, for girls between 15 and 17, is 40 out of every 1,000 births. The North East average is 49, which does make us, if you want to call it that, the worst region. But as Kate has said, the numbers are going in the right direction. In the last year, it's gone down from just below 49 to just below 43. So it's heading in the right direction. I think there's a lot of good education work being done there, and I think it's particularly successful when young people themselves are helping to drive that education and to make sure that they're the ones that are asking the right questions and actually being involved in the process rather than being lectured to. And it's also important that the right support is there, and that is about accessing contraceptive and getting the right sex education. I've never hidden from the fact that I think that rather than avoid talking about sex in schools, actually should talk about it. I don't believe that it leads people to go off and do it any more than they were inclined to do it in the first place. But what it might do is to give them access to the knowledge that they need. And it's not just about contraception, it's about alcohol, for example. I would imagine quite a number of young girls get pregnant under the influence of alcohol. My final point is this, which is that it's about self-perception, I think. It's not just the ones who aspire to go to university, it's girls that have no real self-esteem and see themselves as not particularly worthy, apart from pleasing their boyfriend, whatever the consequences are. But the real work needs to be done, not just with these girls, but actually with the boys, because as I recall, it actually does take two.
Yeah, I never got a sex education. I mean, your mum and dad just seem to forget, and they never got around to it at school. Now, it might sound flippant, I could have done with one. You know, got me in a lot of trouble not having one. And not just what you do, but why you do it, and the kind of social context of why you do it. I could have done with a bit of that. And I think, especially now, with younger girls, it's younger and younger and younger, the sexualisation goes younger and younger. It's quite disturbing, really. And the sort of peer group pressure as well to do things which they know perhaps have not talked about to anybody about why they're supposed to do them, what it means and whatever, as well as, you know, actually getting pregnant. Just the other kind of things that it means in their lives, emotional turmoil and whatever. I kind of feel sorry, you know, with that early sexualisation of people now, where they don't get a childhood. I think it's terrible. You know, I love my childhood. I love going back and reading William books, thinking that's when there used to be a childhood. And it seems to have been taken away from them, and I just think it's sad. I might get my sex education soon.
Yes, I mean, I think it's absolutely abhorrent to force any woman to have an abortion against her will. It's her choice, and we should support that woman in making that choice and support her through the consequences of whatever choice she makes. Within North Tyneside, just a couple of statistics. Since the 1998 baseline, there's been a reduction of 26.5%, which is a better than average improvement, but the level is still worse than national average. As Alan says, the conception rate per thousand of population has actually fallen to about just under 43%. When our under 18 females access the North Tyneside contraception service, 32% of them choose long-acting reversible contraception, which far exceeds the national average. It exceeds it by over 14–15%. Now this has got to be a good news story. The problem we have, I think, is attracting more of our younger females into this system where they're educated and they're put onto this contraception, which is reversible, but so it does affect the figures. So we need to increase the number, accessing this. And we do have partners working in this area, PCT, the one-to-one centre in Shire promotes access to contraception and sexual health services. We have a sexual health outreach team which provides a kind of, I was going to say user-friendly, but that maybe gives the wrong impression, but a more friendly service to young people. And we are in North Tyneside, again, I agree with Alan that sex and relationship education should be a fundamental part of any school's PHSE programme. And the final point that I would like to make, I think is what everyone else has made, we need to educate both young men and young women to take responsibility to ensure that pregnancy is not the outcome of all sexual activity. It's as important that young men are educated as it is that young women are educated. And I think in North Tyneside we are trying to address this problem.
Right, well, we're going to move on to our fourth question tonight through the form class 10ASJ.
Does the panel think that the recent events in Japan will slow down nuclear development?
I think again, it's so absolutely difficult. I was looking at some Greenpeace material, and I know it's like a really heavily biased kind of account because they're actively not in favour of nuclear power. I do think nuclear power costs a lot, and it is extremely precarious. And just kind of in the very infancy of like my thoughts on this, I do think there are much more kind of sustainable sources of power out there. And obviously we have our coast very nearby, and or not everywhere is a coast place where you know, wind and water power could be heavily utilised. And I think that sometimes nuclear power is kind of like a cheaper option in the short term, but much more expensive environmentally in the long term. And a disaster like what happened in Japan is only kind of going to set back and give more kind of dread to these types of energy.
Question from the audience.
I know you said that it was quite precarious and there are alternatives to the power, but do you not think we're already too far down the nuclear energy route to change? Well, apparently Japan depends, I think, 30% on nuclear energy, so is it not too far to change to renewables that produce less energy?
I think it's worth remembering that nuclear power, the nuclear was developed for war. It was developed as heating to start with. It was developed as a weapon to kill people. It's only later they thought, well, maybe we can do something else with it. The nuclear industry has an enormous propaganda outfit that perpetuates this myth that nuclear power is A, cheap and it's not, B, safe, which is not. And hey, think of these guys, think, here's a huge seismic fault in Japan, let's build some nuclear stations on it. Blimey, nuclear power stations, that's a good idea. Whoever thought of putting them there, you know, and although, you know, we don't have seismic faults in Britain, we do have other things. We have coastal erosion. We've got a lot of our nuclear power stations are perched on top of cliffs. you know, there's people say there's a terrorism threat. I don't think it's a viable force. You know, the world is blessed with all these natural things that don't run out, like waves, like wind. They will just give us as much energy as you want forever, if only we harness them. And yet we go with nuclear. Nasty, dangerous, blows up. All sorts.
David Lilly, you seem not to agree.
Well, I mean, I think you have to have a power basket in a sense, and I think, you know, everything in its place in that basket. In an ideal world, wave, wind, renewables will produce all the energy requirements that we need. The fact is, they just will not do that. We would be ever dependent upon importing oil, problems in the Middle East, oil dries up. Importing gas, problems in the Ukraine and Russia, the gas pipes turned off. So we would be dependent on others for our power. And I think nuclear power has its part to play. I'm not, again, I keep harking back to my childhood. I lived in an area where one of the first nuclear power stations was built. It didn't seem to affect us at all. But I don't believe in putting all our eggs in one basket and going totally down the nuclear route. But I do feel it has its place. Obviously, we don't live on this specific ring, which is this notorious fault line. So earthquakes, tsunamis are not really a problem here. The safety lessons will obviously be learned from the Fukushima disaster, as they were from Chernobyl, and I'm assuming any progress along the nuclear line in this country will incorporate all modern safety features. I think nuclear power is a low-cost fuel. It produces large fuel reserves. We have an insatiable appetite for fuel. We'll be the first people to complain if our fuel was cut off. So I think in an ideal world, perhaps no nuclear. In the real world, it's got to be part of the basket.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely agree. In an ideal world, perhaps no nuclear power, but it does seem that in order to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and natural fuels, and the fact that we actually cannot make enough power to power our needs using wind, water, solar power, which, I mean, the myth there is, oh, wind power, water power does no harm to your environment. Not true at all. You have to do lots of destroying of land and infrastructures and ecosystems in order to have lots of wind power, so have some nuclear power. To answer the question though, will the disaster in Japan put people off, or will it reduce nuclear development? I think it will, because people seem to have such very irrational thoughts and beliefs and ways of thinking about power. The word, yes, I agree, nuclear power is scary, but I don't think its perceived scariness is as great as small as its actual scariness.
But I mean, do you not think that's partly due to the fact that actually nuclear disasters are very rare?
Very rare.
But at the same time,
very bad. When they happen, they're very bad. Yes, very bad. And could destroy the entire planet, which is pretty bad in the as bad as it gets. Well, indeed, no, I would agree. I was going to say that, although worse is when people refuse to have wind farms because they're ugly. That is the worst reason for not wanting a positive extra fuel, and yet so many people will protest wind farms on this basis. They're ugly. Actually, I find wind farms very beautiful. Yeah, so perhaps that's why I disagree. But wind farms are ugly and nuclear power is scary. That's not the basis to decide these things on. That's all.
Well, what's happening in Japan slow down our nuclear program? The answer is it might do. It might do because people will want to go even further to make sure that any future development is safe, and when you add costs into it, it's already very, very expensive. And therefore it might actually do that. But I agree broadly, and perhaps the only time tonight with David, because our UK power stations are not the same design as the Japanese ones. We've got a pretty good safety record, actually. As Peter said, I think we're not on the rim where there are earthquakes and tsunamis. It's very, very unlikely to happen. And as most of the panel said, well, what is the alternative? And there are many different views on this, but what is the alternative? Because we're a high energy society. Are we going to rely on oil forevermore, in which case we probably have to be prepared to protect the world's few resources that are left and maybe even fight for them? Or are we going to rely on imported gas? Well, the tap can be turned off. I came up on the train from London today, and there are more and more windmills in County Durham than I've seen before, and it unnerves me slightly. I don't find them offensive, but it unnerves me slightly. And I do have some sympathy with communities that say we don't want them. One of the first campaigns I fought was against open cast just beyond, just towards Ersden, actually. Do people want open cast so that we can have coal-powered power stations again? Or we're going to have offshore wind, in which case my fishermen are going to be knocking on the door saying, don't you know that gets in the way of what we want to do? Or are we going to be really hypocritical? Or are we going to say, well, we get our electricity from France and we'll pretend that it doesn't come from French nuclear power stations? But it's a very difficult decision.
Do you have a question?
It's just a comment really. What I was going to say was,
You would think that in a country where they'd had Hiroshima and seen radiation from such an angle that they would have decided not to have nuclear power, but it didn't obviously put them off.
Yeah.
I think what might put them off today is hearing in the news that babies have been advised not to drink the tap water in Japan, and I think that is where it starts to put people off.
Can I just say,
sorry, there's another question right at the back.
Bearing in mind the current economic climate, what are people's thoughts about the relative low cost effectiveness of things such as wind farms, which are actually quite expensive to build and don't yield that much energy?
Well, it ties in with what I was going to say. As well as actually, do we need nuclear power? David, I don't know if you've been insatiable. This is our insatiable demand for power. It is insatiable. And one thing everybody can do is have less reliance, on oil, on those fuels, by just changing your lifestyle slightly. I mean, it's only a small thing, but if everybody does it. I mean, I ride a bike. If I go within 4 miles of anywhere, I ride a bike rather than go in a car or whatever, or I walk somewhere. Little things like that can have a big effect, actually. And I think our desire for oil has to change, actually. Has to change. A, it's ruining the planet. B, it gets into wars all over the place. And C, it's very unhealthy. So, just get down the shop and buy a bike. Yeah,
I just wanted to make a comment that nobody dealt with the problem of getting rid of nuclear waste. That is one of the biggest problems that we have with the nuclear industry. We don't know how to make it safe when we want to get rid of it. And people are dumping it in the sea and all over the place, and the planet is going to go up in smoke if we're not careful.
It's only active for 400,000 years.
But I'm not aware that we are dumping it in the sea. It is probably one of the biggest, most expensive problems associated with nuclear power, but I do think that there are ways of storing. But I accept that there is a kind of unknown aspect to this. But just to go back to what Peter said about we can buy a bike and turn our lights off, that's fine, but you've got the emerging economies of China and India that are consuming huge amounts of energy and actually pushing up world energy prices. So, we're going to get squeezed out of that some way. It's not about tinkering at the edges. It's about having a reliable supply of power because we all use it and we all need it.
Okay.
How can the government justify continuing to spend so much money on overseas aid when huge cuts have taken effect in the UK?
Well, I think another bad measure of the civilisation of society is how much they do support the less well off. I mean, we think, I know we've got an economic problem here, we think we're badly off. I mean, I've spent quite a long time in Lebanon and other places recently, and in Palestinian refugee camps. I come back and I just think how incredibly grateful I am for how well off I am and how well off most of us here are. So, we are blessed with a fairly, compared to, everything is relative in this life, and compared to most of the world, we're blessed with a pretty affluent way of life. And I think we should be grateful for that. And I never begrudge money that goes to the developing world.
David Lilly.
I agree with what Peter's just said. I think we're morally obliged to offer assistance to these developing nations to enable the population of those countries to improve the basic quality of their lifestyle. I think we have two strands of aid. One is the regular aid and one is the emergency aid. And I think really an example of the ongoing, we spent 500,000 on the International Criminal Courts Trust Fund for victims. a laudable scheme, supporting people in Uganda and the Congo, assisting people who've been the victims of torture and sexual violence, and this is ongoing. And I think, you know, it is a laudable aim to support these people. Emergency aid, £134 million for Pakistan floods. Do we not send that? Do we not support the Haitians when they have their earthquake? Do we not support the Japanese? I think we're morally obliged to go down both of these strands. I do have one little niggle, a little sort of worry, and that is some of the countries we help. I just wonder how much of the money goes into the despot's bank account. Setting up foreign bank accounts, when they're overthrown, they live in a lot of luxury. I just wonder if there's any mileage in international agreements to freeze any of these people's bank accounts if they are seen to be diverting aid money for their own personal use. But I think, in a sense, that might be a small side issue. I think we are morally obliged to support these people.
Yeah, one of the most successful campaigns ever in modern history, I think, is the Jubilee 2000 campaign. They completely changed the debate on this, but were very, very fortunate because there was a Labour government actually. We changed the debate, and there were only two commitments that the Conservatives gave at the general election, really, that they stuck to, and one of them was to move to meet the target of 0.7% of GDP on foreign aid. We actually changed that debate, and that was down to a massive public campaign. I'm delighted that happened. We also changed the rules, if you remember, on tax giving, so that the whole amount of money that people give to good causes actually gets to those good causes. I think we have got a moral obligation. I find it offensive when I watch the television, whether it's Red Nose or whatever. I watch the television and I see some of those scenes in communities, either where there is no work or where what work there is are for Western multinational corporations that are simply exploiting them. But in the hard-headed world, it's not just about our moral obligation. It's a fact that it is our interest to help people abroad. Because if you don't, you end up with conflict. If you don't, you end up with political instability. If you don't, you end up with refugees at your shore wanting to get a better life in our country or on the edges of Europe. What I do find offensive, however, is that having committed to 0.7%, the current government is busy shifting the goalposts on how the money should be spent. They're going back to the idea that foreign aid should be linked with trade, and they're going back to the idea through soft power that it should be linked to somehow military action. And I find that offensive. The way that you get around the despot point is what we did. You give the money to the non-governmental organisations like Christian Aid, etc. They spend the money because they do it better.
Question just in the front row. It's a question.
Yeah, my question is, it's all quite well saying that in countries such as Rwanda, they obviously need the aid, but I mean Japan was brought up and they are a very rich country, so surely it's a different issue to whether we can justify giving money to countries who can clearly afford it, to giving countries who clearly can't.
I think it was
Well, it sounds like you're saying, though, you're referring to the emergency aid that we're giving to Japan and saying that, well, they can afford it and they're all right, really. And I think you only have to... they're not all right, really. You only need to see the TV pictures, the cost there again. Oh, this is the trouble with me being on the panel, because I'm thinking mid-course. I was going to say, how can we not help when that help is needed in that one instance? On the other hand, it leads to a warm glow. I think it is that irrational warm glow. It's the warm glow of comic relief and kind of the virtuous feeling of, oh, look, indirectly, because I've just made a donation, people are happy. Or slightly happier, or in fact, probably not happy at all, actually, but just slightly better off. Sorry, I'm waffling. The flip side of helping, though, is that self-righteous sense of, oh, we've got a warm glow, we've helped, so now we can interfere in their politics because we helped. And now, well, it was our responsibility to help. So it's also our responsibility to save citizens and faff about with political systems and decide who should be in power and who shouldn't be in power. In an emergency crisis situation, at least we won't do that, we'll stay far away from Japan. But in Africa and in the Middle East and in India, it does that the warm glow then seems to lead to the self-righteousness of the interfering neighbour. We are like the interfering neighbour, who on the one hand is brilliant, because we're the neighbour you can rely on to water your plants or make sure your cat doesn't die when you're on holiday. But at the same time, we're the interfering neighbour who's always knocking up at your window and nosying in and might one day turn into a complete stalker and kill all of them. Rescue that at the end of things.
We'll have David Lilly.
Sorry, I was just going to make the point that with answering the gentleman's point there, with Japan, it's emergency aid. Japan's infrastructure is, I mean, it is a rich country, but it's broken down. You just have to look at the damage, the carnage that's happening in Japan. I mean, it's not necessarily just sending pound notes out there. It's sending aid, sending tents, sending dogs, sending rescue workers, sending expertise to get things moving. It isn't just about dipping your hand and saying, there's £100 million. I think we can't sit back if they need the help. You can't say, sorry, you're a rich country. We've got assets that might help you, but we're not going to send them.
I think we kind of sometimes have to rewind history a bit on the case of foreign aid, because there's kind of this perception that our work in trying to tackle racism, and time again, a massive anger is that we're giving money to all these countries, you know, to try and help them out, and kind of what about me sense. And obviously that's a perception and it's a real anger for those people. But I try and get them to rewind and think, well actually, what did we take from these countries at first to then feel, and for them to be in a position where they have to catch up and they are miles and miles behind, not in terms of their people, but in terms of maybe industrial development or whatever. So there is a false perception also that aid is free, that you just get aid. There are conditions to aid, and I know that there are corrupt leaders out there. I lived in Nigeria for a while and I've seen money squandered left, right and centre, and you know, there are children literally dying of thirst, even though the country's getting aid. But the conditions, again, just like, you know, the UN intervention, aren't always altruistic, and there are massive benefits for the United Kingdom giving aid to other countries, and it's not always you know, about security or about you know, keeping asylum seekers away. Sometimes it is pure profit. Because sometimes, you know, and I read a statistic just yesterday that for every 1 billion that is given out in aid, 4 billion is paid back in debt. So actually there is this massive false perception that we are somehow really generous, altruistic, and that's unfair because we are struggling. Actually, it's really selfish, foreign aid. Even the concept of it is selfish.
Yes, just to pick up on Kate's point, actually, I'm in favour of warm gloves. I think warm gloves are really nice. I'd rather have a warm glove than have the coolness of the situation where we said nothing to do with us. The world's problems are nothing to do with us. We're going to put up our barriers. We're going to maybe trade with you, but nothing else. I think if you get a warm glove from putting your hand in your pocket, or actually then going on to do something about it through fair trade, or actually going out and volunteering and doing something else, I think that's fantastic.
Okay, well that's all we have time for. We're going to do another audience vote. So if you do feel that we should continue to give the amount of aid that we do, hold the green card. And if you feel we should give less, hold the red card. That's 100%. Right. Thank you very much for coming along. I'd like to thank all our panellists, and thank you very much, and good night.